Welcome to our podcast, Decoding Gaming Law. I'm your host, Franklin, and today we have Serafino Vaccino.
Hi.
Group Data Protection Officer and AI Legal Lead at EveryMatrix. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Serafino, tell us a bit about you and what you do at EveryMatrix.
So, EveryMatrix is one of the major B2B providers in the gambling industry, and I take care of the data protection and privacy side of business operations. At the same time, I deal with AI, and as you know, this is something which is increasingly
a very hot topic.
Yes, exactly, and it's some work that has to be done, but I managed to do that.
And it's going to be interesting to explore the synchronization of data protection and the rights of data subjects and AI. So for our listeners, today we're going to be focusing on privacy laws. So the first question to you is how the general data protection regulation and other privacy laws impact the gaming developers.
So, when it comes to online gambling, we know that the data, as any other digital industry, is a fuel to the operations. So, we have a deluge of data, which can be financial data, which can be system-based data or KYC-based data from players. I mean, we have a lot of data. We have different types of data. And when it comes to the developers, I think there is an important role that they can play when it comes to data security and data accuracy. When it comes to, development, new functionalities, new software, new products, new services for players, the data is the key. But if you have bad data, you start having issues from the very beginning. So it's very important that developers don't underestimate their role when it comes to, data protection and privacy of players and a good handling of data. This means that they have to conceive products and services with data protection by design and by default at the very beginning, which basically means you have to have a plan for this data. It's the management of the life cycle of this data from when you actually get this data on board until you get rid of them. So until it's time to say bye to this data because it's no longer valid, it's no longer relevant. So when it comes to privacy by design, I mean, they have developers, they have to think of functionalities that can basically accommodate data subject rights from the very beginning. So it means abiding by, for example, data minimization principle. Why? Because if you ingest a lot of data and you don't need so much data, you expose the data subject to risks, which of course means hassle for the business, which means that the data subject can have severe repercussions. So when you design a product as a developer, just think of the scoping of this data. How much data do you need? What type of data you really need? And more importantly, the source of this data. It's very important that developers actually take data from sources which are reliable. We cannot just afford in the industry to have bad data, because that turns to be a nightmare, not only from a privacy perspective, but from a user perspective. Because probably if you basically develop a service or a functionality that is not really accurate when it comes to the data that it inputs, then also the functionality of that software, of that service is impaired.
Okay. So just to summarize a bit and recap, because you gave quite a lot of information and very valid information. And one principle which caught my mind is data minimization. What is that? And sort of what it's good for our listeners to understand is not everything is personal data. So explain a bit what is personal data and what is the data covered for data subjects and how they're protected, and the data minimization principle.
So, I mean, we have, first of all, the definition offered by the law, the GDPR.
Exactly.
Personal data definition is very comprehensive.
Yes.
Because it includes also data, information that can indirectly identify a person, a living subject. This is what we are talking about. So, I mean, when it comes to personal data, this is quite broad concept.
Exactly.
And even those pieces of information or data points, if we want to talk about a vocabulary that is used by developers and technical people, even this performance data can be deemed to be personal data. It depends on the context. For example, an IP address, which is an indirect identifier, or even the fiscal code number of certain data subjects, are at first approach, they don't look like personal data, but they are, because they are basically uniquely assigned to a person, even though it's something that doesn't spell immediately, directly, conspicuously your name, but it's assigned to you. So it's very important that developers take the exercise of scoping the information very seriously, because let's say, the bar to set the personal data definition is very, very high, in the sense that it comprehends a lot of information.
Exactly.
So the data subjects, they have to be basically protected in this respect.
And what is data minimization?
The data minimization is a principle which is embedded in the GDPR, but in many other laws worldwide. And as you know, GDPR is a principle-based regulation.
Yeah.
And one of the main principles is data minimization, which means basically you need to process only the information that is actually needed.
Exactly.
So you don't need to overload your system with information. Just take what you need. This is the first step to achieve privacy success.
Very interesting. And of course, I mean, people in the industry now, I think they're quite geared when it comes to privacy laws and compliance with GDPR, because we've on the 7th year now of GDPR.
Yes.
It's a fully harmonized regulation across all EU member states, so there's a complete avoidance of discrepancy in interpretation. But when it comes to extraterritoriality of the regulation, can you explain if, for example, an American developer needs to abide by GDPR principles?
Of course. I mean, there is a misconception that if you are outside of the EU, you are safe and you don't have to comply with GDPR. But as you mentioned, GDPR has a tremendous extraterritorial effect, basically. And that means that even an American developer that, for example, is dealing with personal data from data subjects residing in Europe has to abide by the GDPR. And this is not really something immediate that business will take into account or would understand at first approach. That is why a lot of developers are in the false confidence that basically they don't need to deal with GDPR.
Exactly.
But it's not like that. And when it comes to data subjects residing in Europe, if you, for example, also target them by remote means in a different country outside of the EU, the GDPR would apply as well. So it's a lot of legal stuff to be taken into account that translate into compliance burden for businesses.
Exactly. And you as AI legal lead, I'm very interested to know, and I think also our listeners, how does AI come into play when it comes to privacy and data subjects' rights? Does it enhance the protection, or does it abuse of it or jeopardize it?
Well, AI, first of all, is not something new. It has been, let's say, with us for decades. but it's just in the last decade that we have seen a surge in AI and an interest in AI. What we call democratization of AI is a process that actually is very important, is key for understanding the role of AI when it comes to impairing or enhancing the privacy and the data protection of the data subjects. So what I mean is that when it comes to democratization of AI, it means that AI can be for everybody. Even people that don't have, for example, experience in coding can now have an AI that code for themselves, and then they can create their own app without any kind of experience. What does it mean? It means that AI is a formidable means to, let's say, achieve great results at fast speed, increase velocity, and the processing of information. It is able to adapt and learn from the data, and that means that it has to have a lot of data to ingest and to learn from. The other side of the coin is that not all the time AI, let's say, shows all its faces to the public. So there is a problem of explainability. Explainability means how the AI reached a certain conclusion. And this can create a tension and a friction, especially when it comes to data subject rights, because, for example, if we actually rely on AI when it comes to detecting fraudsters in the online gambling, this is automated processing, and let's say the entire process for the AI to achieve that particular result, so triggering a fraud alert and then assigning a fraud role to a certain player. Sometimes we don't know what's happening behind the scenes because it's very complicated. And I think that AI can be, let's say, on the one hand, very positive because, as I told you, it is able to deal with a lot of data and to achieve great results. On the other hand, it can create mistrust or frustration when it comes to data subjects, or even the same business users, because they don't really understand how certain results are achieved, because the logic can be, let's say, blurred.
Do I need to inform my data subjects that I'm using AI or obtain their consent? Do gaming operators need to do that now that AI is being used more often? And also keeping in mind the AI Act, which is a European law which will be becoming enforced shortly.
Yes, as you mentioned, the AI Act, for example, is a new piece of regulation from the EU, and that brings a lot of obligations on the business. One of them being, let's say, being transparent to data subjects about the use of AI. Of course, there is let's say, a connection between AI and the automated process of personal data, and that is something which is dealt with by the GDPR in Article 22. When it comes to this kind of automated processing, there is an obligation of transparency toward the data subject. So the data subject must know that their data is processed by automated means, and in this case, it is processed by AI.
And they need to consent for it?
Absolutely, yes.
Very good, very interesting. I'm going to move on to another hot topic, which is data breaches. I'm sure you encounter quite, I wouldn't say a lot, but data breaches happen.
Yes.
So what does a data breach constitute? If I send an email to the wrong recipient, is that a data breach? And sort of, if that breach happens, what do I need to do?
So basically, data breach, as you mentioned, is something very common, especially in the digital world. There is no zero risk in the digital operations, and the data breaches can, let's say, take different shapes. There can be a breach in confidentiality, for example, so somebody that accessed a certain piece of information or certain information without being authorized, or it's an integrity problem because there has been an alteration, unauthorized alteration of data, or availability problem. So the data is not available to the rightful owner or to the rightful data subject. Something that we encounter very often in the gambling industry, and we have seen a surge in this kind of attacks. It's like the DDoS attack. DDoS attack as distribution of the denial of services. Basically, it happens because we have servers that are fueled with a lot of data, and basically the attackers try to take advantage of the traffic, so they flood the servers with a lot of traffic, and they create an unavailability of the data, which is a data breach. As I was telling before, there are 3 categories, as I was mentioning. This is something common in the gaming industry. So it's not only about you send an email to, let's say, the wrong addressee, but it's also when you are denied in terms of using a service, and that can happen to players.
So, I mean, you just mentioned cyber attacks, really and truly, which constitutes data breaches, I believe. But what is the motive? You mentioned so they take advantage, but is there a lucrative motive why cyber attacks happen? A sort of ransom, like pay us and we will stop the cyber attack.
Absolutely. Just think about the most reputable operators in the industry. If they are subject to this kind of attacks, this is a very bad thing for them in terms of reputation, in terms of customers losing trust. What happens here is that not every data breach is the same. So it is really context sensitive.
Okay.
You really need to take into account the context, how many people, how many data subjects are involved, and the scale of these attacks, because that will dictate the velocity, but also at the same time the dynamics of your response to this threat, to these breaches.
And in terms of when a cyber attack happens, can you give us like an example of, do I need to inform the data subject about this? What are the data subject's rights? Is the company liable? Is the company responsible, even though it took all the precautionary measures to avoid such cyber attacks?
Well, again, even in these cases, it is something very context sensitive, in the sense that the company, the business can be held liable by all means, but to the extent that these businesses have not been, let's say, diligent in what they do, which means basically not caring that much about data security, data protection, and processes, business processes that surround the data processing operations. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think security first and foremost starts from the users. Most of the attacks that we have seen and we continue to see in the industry are originated because of insecure handling by the same users, by the data subjects of their own information, which means, for example, reusing the same credentials that they use to access certain digital service throughout different operators or throughout different
same passwords.
Same passwords.
I'm guilty of that. I have to say.
Probably if you choose also a password which is very weak, like your name and your date of birth, that will be easily spotted by attackers.
Exactly.
So I think the businesses must also educate the users. Mm-hmm. There is a lot that the businesses can do when communicating with the users, not only through the terms and conditions, but probably through dedicated channels, which means also providing updates on the latest security practices to users, which can be, of course, digested by people that don't deal with this from a technical perspective.
Yes, I mean, you're completely right. I think the gatekeepers of security are the users themselves. That's the first line of defense. And unfortunately, the reality is a lot of information is within the privacy policy, is within terms and conditions, but we don't really read that, do we? So what you said is good, that there's focused specific channels on how your data is being protected by the operator. So I'm going to take you a little bit back. Cybersecurity and AI. How can AI help in preventing cyber attacks? And does it enhance or minimize risk of cyber attacks?
So AI, as I said, has one of the benefits of the AI is basically that it can process a lot of data in a very short span of time. You know, this means that you can employ AI to, for example, talking about cyber attacks, to analyze your traffic, to analyze whether the volume of the traffic that for example, that website from an operator perspective, of course, is experiencing is okay, or it's out of the norm. This is something that can be done by AI, and it can give you also real-time alerts. So AI can be an incredible means to protect users, to protect businesses, to analyze your traffic, to tell you exactly what are the weak points of your IT posture, for example. And as I told you, since AI is actually formidable when it comes to learning from the past and predicting the future, it can be that AI can anticipate the risks based on former incidents. So you can run an AI.
Machine learning.
Exactly, right? Exactly. That is the point. You can employ AI to learn from past experiences, and it will predict with, let's say, a good very rate of accuracy what will happen, depending on the context, depending on your IT posture and your systems. So it can be used for these things, but at the same time, it can be used to put a firm in this, let's say, in disrepute, basically. What I mean is that the democratization of AI gives people that don't even have a particular knowledge or competence the possibility to launch attacks, to launch phishing attacks, for example, on large scale. And that is quite concerning. So as you can see, it's like two sides of the same coin. It really depends how you use AI.
Thank you very much, Serafino. As we previously discussed, time is going to fly, and it actually flew. So your concluding remarks for operators in the gaming industries when it comes to privacy, what would they be?
I think operators, they really need to be conscious about what they want to offer to users, first and foremost, because only by doing so they can actually downstream all the other considerations that will help the business thrive and the operations thrive. So it means basically having in mind what functionalities they really want to offer, the markets that they want to launch their product in. Not every service can be available in every market. Geographical areas may differ from a regulatory perspective, but also customer tastes. And when it comes to compliance, it's very important to employ feature flagging from the developer perspective from the very beginning, which means basically you can trigger or you can shut down certain functionality of your software depending on the compliance and regulatory burden in a certain market without redeploying the code. This would save a lot of time and money to businesses. Also, I think the businesses should consider the risk framework from a very comprehensive perspective, which means they need to create a risk management framework with the participation of a lot of stakeholders, internal stakeholders. The more the better, because they can give diversity and they can give a representativeness of different point of views, and they can enrich, you know, this framework. And last, I think businesses should also consider that not all the data is good, but when it comes to, let's say, outdated data, it's better to actually focus on retrieving newly acquired data, you know, new data that can be more accurate, more pertinent, rather than sticking to the past ones, which are no longer usable.
Thank you very much, Serafino. Very grateful, and I'm sure our listeners would be grateful just the same. And it was a very interesting topic, and I hope we'll have the pleasure of inviting you again to enhance on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure also for me.